Welcome to my garden, to the GinGee GoodEarth production number 6, part 6. I will be reading on the Vikings, finishing up chapter 3, and I'm also going to give an introduction to the last of the Mohicans. And this was my Uncle John Squeer's private book collection, and he had a Doctor of Law, and he served in World War I in the cavalry, and he was a great person, and he, obtained a Doctor of Law. And he also was the postmaster of McAdoo, Pennsylvania, and back in World War I, the president at that time commanded that certain soldiers from World War I would be the postmasters of the local United States Post Office. And that's how they employed the post office with military veterans. So the last of the Mohicans, chapter 1. Mine ear is open, and my heart prepared. The worst is worldly loss, the caused unfold. Say, is my kingdom lost? Shakespeare. It was a feature particular of the colonial wars of North America that the toils and dangers of the wilderness were to be encountered before the adverse hosts could meet. A wide and apparently an impervious boundary of forest severed the possessions of the hostile provinces of France and England. The hardy colonist and the trained European who fought at his side frequently expended months in struggling against the rapids of the streams, or in effecting the rugged passes of the mountains, in quest of an opportunity to exhibit their courage in a more martial conflict. But emulating the patience and the self-denial of the practiced native warriors, they learned to overcome every difficulty, and it would seem that in time there was no recess of the woods so dark, nor any secret place so lovely, that it might be claimed exemption from the inroads of those who had pledged their blood to saturate their vengeance, or to uphold the cold and selfish policy of the distant monarchs of Europe. So I'll leave it at that, and we will be reading the book, The Last of the Mohicans, and this is from my Uncle John's personal library. He was actually a great uncle, and his name was John Squeer, and he was in the cavalry, World War I, and he was shot in the arm. In those days, they didn't have quick medical clinics or care, and so when I was a child, I was able to go up to his forearm, and he would show me where the bullet was, and you could feel the hard-leaded bullet in his arm, still situated. It was never removed. So good thing you have muscles when you're fighting in conflict with bows and arrows and guns, because your body can be your only protective garment that you have sometimes. So now next is the book on the Vikings, and I want to try to finish chapter 3. So let's do this. I always thought this was fun to do. A little play acting, right? GinGee GoodEarth, The Vikings, 6/23. I have to fix that. And Irene Goodnight's in the background. One of her Christian music albums. So we go. It's June 23, but it might be the 24th. I have to look. Hey, when you're older, you just want to forget the days, let me tell you. Okay, does it really matter? Yes, it does. There's Trillium. So enjoy the picture show, and I'll back it up so you can see the picture show. And let's get started on the Vikings. And without further ado, chapter 3, page, we saw Eric the Red. There's Eric the Red. And again, this book is written with a lot of truth and informational to the stories. And there they are canoeing on the river. And there's a Viking ship. And they have landed in a new region for Eric to reside in. And as we go back, the story, it looks like Eric is on the run again with his family. So, but Janari was sent home to his father, Hervgulf, to recover from his wound. And Leif missed him, but Harold taught both the boys to run on skis that winter, and every day while the light lasted, they were out practicing. So they were snow skiing, and they were out practicing. The one thing no one dared ask Eric was what they were going to do in the spring. The men at arms who would rather have died than gone to serve someone else were eager to set out on a voyage for trade and plunder down to England or the coast of France. Leif and Brandon, who were sure they would be left behind with their mothers if Eric went a Viking, did not think much of this idea. Besides, from the little that Eric said, they believed that he was anxious to leave Iceland altogether. He seemed to think that since justice had gone against him twice when he took the law into his own hands, he would never be able to live in peace again in Iceland. But in what country would Eric settle? If he went to Norway or Scotland or Ireland, he would have to accept another man as overlord, a man who had settled there earlier. Leif could not imagine his father serving any overlord. The boys were talking about it one afternoon when they came in from snow skiing. They had discussed half a dozen places when Leif said, "I wish your Saint Brandon had really found land to the west as the story you told me said he did." Brandon bristled. "He did find land. You Norse believe that no one but yourselves can go exploring. Let me tell you, Leif, when the first Norsemen came to Iceland, they found the Irish here before them." Yes, it is true. I always say that Mother Hearth is in Ireland, and that's where the Celtic people evolved, and then they expanded throughout Europe. Yes, it's true. The story of Floki of the Ravens says that when he landed here, there were Irish hermits living in Iceland. Where did they vanish to then? Asked Leif scornfully. They sailed to the west, to Brendan's Islands, because they wouldn't stay here with the heathens, cried Brandon angrily. That's a lie, Leif answered hotly, furious at being called a heathen. Promptly, Brandon dived at his legs and bowed him over on the floor. In a second, the two boys were pummeling each other to the accompaniment of such pleasant phrases as Irish thrall, Norse heathen. Suddenly, a big hand came down on the shoulders of each boy, and they were pulled apart. "What's all this row?" asked Eric sternly. Leif was about to say, "He called me a heathen," and then remembered that he had called Brandon a slave, which was at least as rude. Nothing, he said and sniffled. "Nothing," said Eric. "What a fine thing to fight about. What will you do if you really disagree?" he said. Leif spluttered indignantly that the Irish came to Iceland before we did. Eric looked down at the boys thoughtfully. he was quite right, he said. Next time, Leaf, you better try to find out the truth before you fight for pride in your own opinion. There were Irish priests here 100 and more years ago, when the first Norse left Norway to escape the tyranny of Harald Fairhair. But when our people began to settle, the Irish wouldn't stay. No one knows where they went. Brandon does, said Leaf bitterly. He didn't like being reproved, even when he knew he was wrong. Oh, said Eric, where did they go, Brandon? They went west. They went to the islands St. Brandon, discovered in the west. That old tale, said Leaf. There is land to the west. Brandon insisted. I know it, I know. Eric sat down on the bench by the wall. Come here, Brandon, he said. Brandon went over to him. How do you know? He asked, not challengingly, but as if he really wanted to hear. Brandon stood before him and took a deep breath. 2 years ago, the thrall named Svert told you there was a good pasture in the mountains behind Hockadell. You remember? 2 years ago, the thrall named Svert told you there was good pasture in the mountains behind Hockadell. You remember? I remember very well, said Eric. That was the start of my troubles. I sent Svart and 4 other men out to look, and they never came back because Volfjolf and Ekolf killed them. But Svart had been in the mountains before. Brandon told Eric he had been Volfjolf's man once before you bought him, and he had run away from him because Volfjolf is a bad master. That's why Volfjolf accused him of starting the landslide that ruined his house. That I didn't know, said Eric thoughtfully. No, Svalt was afraid to tell that he had ever run away for fear that you wouldn't trust him. But it was only because Volfjolf beat him. Anyway, he went up into the mountains one spring, and he was away nearly all the summer, living on berries and what birds he could snare, and a rabbit or two. He wandered in the mountains for months, all over the peninsula. Finally, it began to be autumn, and he could find no more food, and, well, he was caught and returned to Volfjolf. I suppose Volfjolf would have killed him if he hadn't been short of men at harvest time. Brandon paused, for he was coming to the important part of the story. Then he went on, but about the land to the west, Svart saw it. If you go high enough in the western mountains, he said, you will see another range of mountains very far to the west, across the sea. There is snow on them even in the summer. Brandon stopped as if he had run out of words. There was a long silence. At last Eric stirred and spoke as if to himself. Land to the west, he said, and then Gunbjorn saw land to the west when he was blown out to sea rounding the west coast of Iceland. Then he fell silent again, and the boys waited beside him, their eyes big, not daring to speak. Suddenly he shook himself and called, Harold! The big blond man came over at once. Yes, Eric? Tomorrow, said Eric. Will you take your skis and go to Thur Grimson's farm? There you will ask him how much he will take for the new ship he had built for himself in Norway. I want to buy it. You can hear the thunder in the background. We have sunny skies and it's thundering outside. Yes, Eric, said Harold. May I go with him? Leaf burst out. Eric laughed and sounded merrier than he had in almost 2 years. I don't know who has a better right to go, unless it's Brandon. You may both go. At least you may, if you promise not to fight about nothing again along the way. So now we're on chapter 3, the voyage to Greenland. So that's another part of chapter 3, I guess. But here's the ship. Here's the Norwegian ship. I'll put a light on it. So the voyage of Greenland, that's what we'll read next. So I have just a little more time, and I will read another section of the book on the wit and wisdom of John F. Kennedy. So let's see where we left off. So, the wit and wisdom of John F. Kennedy. And I left off after the conquest of space. So we went over peace, freedom, the arts, the conquest of space. And now I will read on foreign affairs, John F. Kennedy. And it's chapter 5. You can hear the thunder in the background. Okay, chapter 5 on foreign affairs. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and the success of liberty. January 20th, 1961. And during the 2020, the pandemic of coronavirus, COVID-19, a lot of citizens from different countries were in different continents, and America made sure that every citizen of America would be retrieved and brought back to United States of America in case this virus outbreak would cause more difficulties, disease, and death among the American citizens, and they did. They were very successful in bringing back every citizen of America back to their homeland, safe and sound, and also paid their way back to ensure their safety to be back on American soil, which is the American mainland, United States of America. So there we go. So they actually were able to work with foreign dignitaries and other leaderships in other countries to ensure the safety of the passage of American citizens. Going back to J.F. Kennedy, to the peoples of half the globe struggling to break the bonds of mass misery, we pledge our best efforts to help them help themselves. Not because the communists are doing it, not because we seek their votes, but because it is right. January 20th, 1961. Let us begin anew, remembering on both sides that civility is not a sign of weakness, and sincerity is always subject to proof. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. I do not